The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. This is program number 842. And it is coming to you on Monday the 24th of October 2016. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic Random Thoughts. And as part of the topic, I begin with preliminary comments. Firstly, I would like to send out my deepest condolences to all families which have suffered recent bereavements, and particularly those families which have suffered the loss of a loved one through violence. But in expressing condolences, I must mention three families in particular. Their losses were not caused by violence, but by natural causes. Firstly, the family of Sister Pauline Charles of Rathamil, who, as I drove up to Dorsetshire Hill a while ago to tape this program, I passed the long line of vehicles around the Streams of Power Church, where the funeral was being held. Sister Charles is well known to all persons who have attended Streams of Power for the last probably 25 years. To the family of the late Mr. Gorman Lewis of Lower Cane Hall, and not connecting, he is of course the senior of his son by the same name, Gorman, so it is not the younger Gorman who has died, it's his father. Well known to residents of the Cane Hall area, with his stately walk, this tall, stately figure going back and forth. My condolences to his family, particularly the children. And also condolences to the Gurley family who suffered the loss of Mrs. Adeline Gurley of Rockies, a lady whom I have known since I went up to Rockies in about 1960-61. She has been the matriarch of the Gurley clan, and my deepest condolences go out to all of you. Now, I can't comment on every single death that I hear about, but there are some people who have touched my life in a special way, and that is why I hail up the families of certain deceased persons practically every program. On a happier note, let me say happy birthday to one Mr. Bantu Dola Campbell, who celebrated his birthday yesterday. He is a young gentleman who is very close to me, being my first son. And let me say to Bantu, you have been a blessing to your parents and your siblings, and now your wife and son. So all the very best to you. And as I'm on Random Thoughts, let me share this with you. Now, of all my children, I remember Bantu's birthday the most vividly, the day of his birth, because that was the day that Sir James Mitchell, as he later became, delivered his first budget for the new NDP government in 1984. I had campaigned with the party in the 1984 elections as one of the main campaigners, And when he came to deliver his budget on the 23rd of August, instead of finding myself at my wife's bedside in the Kingston General Hospital, as it was then called, there was I in the House of Assembly. I took Mrs. Campbell to the hospital in the morning when her water bag burst and told the nurses they must call and let me know when she has given birth, because she had born 2 daughters before that, and I thought, well, this is going to be another daughter, so I have seen the birth of the first 2. I could always miss this one. And during the session of the budget, somebody came and told me that I was needed on the telephone, because I had given the nurses the telephone number of the House of Assembly. And when I went and took the call, a nurse informed me that Mrs. Campbell had given birth, and it was a son. Well, that was the end of me and Mr. Mitchell's budget here. I went to the parking lot, got into my car, and sped to the Kingston General Hospital to greet my firstborn son. And we, the family, nicknamed him Budget because he was born on Budget Day. So, Mr. Mitchell's first budget. Mr. Mitchell, of course, later on became Sir James Mitchell, and the Kingston General Hospital later on became the Milton Cater Memorial Hospital. Tribute to Mr. Mitchell. You know, one thing you have to admire about Mr. Mitchell, he did honor the 2 previous prime ministers in recent times in significant ways. The hospital was named after Mr. Cato, and the airport was named after Mr. Joshua. Random thoughts. Belated happy birthday as well to Sister Donna Scott, sorry, where did I get Combs from? Sister Donna Scott, the Reverend Donna Scott, celebrated yesterday as well. Belated happy birthday to you, my Sister Donna, excuse me. Well, we are in what has been called Patriotic Week. Now, every week should really be Patriotic Week, but as things go by, there is a special sentiment as we are about to celebrate the 37th anniversary of political independence for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My best wishes to all the persons who have organized various functions, and in particular today has been the National Day of Prayer. Again, every day should be a day of prayer for the nation. But I listened to NBC Radio 705 and heard some of the prayers which were delivered on behalf of the nation. This afternoon I heard the Reverend Adolph Davis call in to say his prayers, and you know, Reverend Davis is a person whose sermons I enjoy listening to because he hits the nail on the head. He pulls no punches. He tells it like it is in language which one and all can understand. All the best to you, my brother. Random thoughts. Now, congratulations are in order for 3 persons who were elevated in the ecclesiastical realm yesterday, Sunday. We of the Spiritual Baptist Archdiocese of St. Vincent and Grenadines had a consecration service during which the Reverend James Harry was elevated to the office of Archdeacon, and 3 reverends were elevated to the office of Canon. Reverend Cosmo Simon, Reverend Michael Foster, and Reverend Nathaniel Lucas. All 3 of them were elevated to the position of canon in the Archdiocese. in a very lovely ceremony ably conducted by His Grace Archbishop Frank Simon, assisted by Senior Minister, the Very Reverend Melford Pompey, and other members of the Spiritual Baptist Archdiocese. Fiery message delivered by Bishop His Lordship Selwyn Brown, and the proceedings were ably conducted by the Right Reverend Canon Winston Daniel. All in all, we had a very spiritual day, very uplifting, and we hope that the newly installed brothers would be fortified in their Christian walk by their elevation to these positions of higher responsibility in the spiritual Baptist hierarchy. And speaking about elevation, let me extend an invitation to one and all to attend at Mount Carmel, the Spiritual Baptist Cathedral, next Sunday at 1 o'clock, 30th of October, where my good friend and brother, Chancellor Ian Enoch, will be consecrated a bishop. Now, Brother Enoch is the manager of the business place known as Going Places. And I can say to him on this occasion, my brother, you are really going places in the hierarchy of the kingdom. So that is at Mount Carmel on Sunday. It will take place at the same time as our harvest at St. Elizabeth Cathedral in Belmont. So I will be attending both functions. DV, it will be the will of the Lord. I plan to go first to our harvest, and then at a suitable time I leave and I go to Mount Carmel at Chester Cottage to share my brother's joy. Now, random thoughts. The first random thought, and I had in mind to make a comment about this a long time ago. Every weekday on NBC Radio 705, I hear the announcer and Desmond Arundel, Brother Desmond Arundel in particular, admonishes the users of the road to do so with care and consideration for others. And twice in that message which he delivers, he uses the words that you must make eye contact with other road users. He advises that pedestrians should make eye contact with vehicles on both sides of a crossing, and similarly that drivers should make eye contact with other drivers. I want to let my brother Desi know that these days it is difficult to make eye contact with drivers because most vehicles have tinted glasses. In fact, you don't see a driver in a lot of vehicles because the vehicle is darkened. You assume that somebody is driving the vehicle, but you can't even see a driver, let alone to see somebody with whom you should make eye contact. And it is a phenomenon which has troubled me in recent years. It is essential to road safety that drivers communicate, and sometimes when it is raining and you can't have your glass down, then everybody with their glasses up, and you can't really see a driver to give a signal or nod. So Desi, I fear that there are only few vehicles on the road in which the driver is capable of making contact with anybody else. And some of the vans on the road, I remember there was a time when the police used to forbid vans from having darkened glasses, but the traffic department appears to have relaxed that policy. So even the passenger vehicles pass by and you don't even know if one person inside, because you can't see inside, you can't see anybody. That is a sign of the times. Another thought, living within your means. Now, modern consumerism has brought about significant cultural changes in people. There was a time, and I remember when I was young, where your parents or your guardians brought you up to believe that you should make do with what you have and don't aspire to things which are not yours and which you cannot attain. Be content. But modern consumerism has brainwashed all of us into thinking that you really must get the things you want, whether you can afford them or not. I'm sure that those of you who are past the age of 40 would readily agree with me. Your children going to school had to make do with what their parents could provide for them. And you were told not to grudge people for what they have, not to envy people for what they have. If you don't have it, do without and be content. But nowadays, it is difficult because we are constantly being bombarded by advertisements on the airwaves and to a lesser extent in newspapers, telling us what we really must have in order to have a happy life, whether we can afford it or not. So that nowadays, parents who can't afford to provide a JanSport bag for a child are made to feel that somehow they are not doing the best thing by their children. Because the children go to school and they want what their friends have, even though their parents and guardians can't afford it. Now, this has some terrible consequences when these children grow up and leave school, because they get into the mentality where they must have X, Y, and Z in keeping with their peers, that when it cannot be provided legitimately, illegitimate means are found for them to have it. So many of the young generation resort to theft, deception, and all sorts of unwanted behavior to get what they think they need. Now, there was a time when everybody may do with an ordinary cell phone. I still make do with ordinary push-button cell phones. My children usually laugh at me and call me ancient, because the trend is now for modern, sophisticated devices with smooth faces. I can't even use those devices. They're very expensive, but people must have them, whether they can afford them or not. Now, one of the things which is assisting that attitude to flourish is inculcated right in the schools. And I'll speak to one issue in particular. Many schools like to arrange educational tours for certain classes. So they embark on fundraising through the PTA and the contributions from the parents to raise a few $100s for their child or their ward to go on a fundraising tour in the long vacation. But some of these tours are becoming more sophisticated than before. I was recently made acquainted with a tour which is planned by one secondary school next year to Trinidad and Panama. Now, those parents who could afford to send their children on the tour, fine, by all means, go and do it. But those parents who can't afford to send their student child on such tours because of the expense should simply tell the children, look, we can't afford it, and that should be the end of the story. The school is not forcing anybody to go on the tour. In fact, there's a form which parents and guardians have to sign to say if their child would be participating or not. So don't say the school is forcing you. But there clearly is pressure on the students, because if you're a member of a class and the class is going on a tour and your parents can't afford to send you, you feel badly, you feel a bit embarrassed that you can't go. But we parents have to insist to our children that if the parents can't afford to do something for them, they have to be satisfied. The children have to be made to understand that there are certain things which parents can afford and certain things which parents cannot afford. I'll give you an example from my own life. When I was in the grammar school, I joined the cadets when I went to Form 3. And I remained in the cadets Forms 3, 4, and 5. When I went to Form 6, I sort of dropped out. And in my years in the cadets, I never went to a single cadet camp. Not even the one held at the grammar school itself during the long holidays. They had camps in the grammar school, cadet camp in Beckway, and I think even one in Trinidad. I couldn't go to any of them for the simple reason that My poor mother couldn't afford it. She was just struggling to send me to the grammar school, because among the list of items I vividly remember for the camp at the grammar school, each cadet had to be equipped with a blanket. And in my home, we didn't have a single blanket in the home. We were so poor. And I understood that. So even though I felt a bit sad that I couldn't go on any cadet corps, for the simple reason that my mother just couldn't afford the few extra dollars it would have taken, I accepted that my mother couldn't afford it, and that was that. So that because I never attended a camp, I never got promoted from private. I remained a private for the 3 years I was in the grammar school, because one of the prerequisites of being promoted to corporal was that you had to have attended a camp. But in those days, we children knew that when your parents were in a position that they can't afford or couldn't afford something for you, you just had to accept. Nowadays, the modern children will find it more difficult to accept that and will harass and browbeat their parents to try and get money to do that. And incidentally, the toy I mentioned a while ago, the cost to each student to go on that tour would be $8,500. Now, the school would be having fundraising events to try and raise some of the money. But not many parents can afford $8,500 to send a child on an educational tour next summer. And if you parents can't afford it, say you can't afford it, and that's the end of the story. If you can afford it, fine, send your student. But if you can't afford it, don't go and resort to all sorts of means of putting yourself in debt which you can't pay for something you can't afford. So that was another random thought. Now, the Grenada Referendum. On Thursday, while we will be celebrating our independence on Thursday, the 27th of October, Grenadians will be voting in a referendum on 7 bills aimed at amending the Grenada Constitution. The chairman of the Grenada Constitution Commission is our good friend Dr. Francis Alexis. They decided, following the St. Vincent example, to go into constitutional reform, but they decided to do it by 7 bills rather than 1 bill, inclusive of all the proposed changes. So over the past couple of years, they have been debating the question of constitutional reform. They have been looking at the bills. And I want to urge Grenadians to give their support to the proposals. I have received, in fact, Dr. Alexis kept in close touch with me, and he kept emailing me the bills as they were modified from time to time. And I do have in my possession the text of all of the 7 bills, which will be placed before the Grenadian electorate on Thursday. And I only hope the Grenadian electorate has the wisdom to approve the proposals. But like in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there have been forces in Grenada opposing the referendum bills. We just have to wait and hear the result in due course. And speaking about voting, I am sure we all have been riveted by the United States presidential election campaign. I follow American politics fairly closely and have done that since I was a youngster studying political science at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. In 1965, I started studying politics. And in the course of our political courses, political science courses, we had to look at the American Constitution, and then I got in the habit of following American politics. Those days, politics was lively in America because you had the Vietnam War, which generated a lot of passion. And on the University of Saskatchewan campus where I was in Saskatoon, we had a lot of American draft dodgers. That is, people, young men from America of military age who didn't want to go and fight in Vietnam and left the United States to study in various universities abroad to get away from the draft. And you had these demonstrations against the Vietnam War from time to time. I took part in some of them. In the first ones, I didn't even understand what the issues were, but I found myself demonstrating. Now, the present election is very important, and there is one reason in particular why I want Mrs. Clinton to win. That is that I know she will do the best she can to deal with the terrible, tragic situation caused by the U.S. embargo on Cuba. And this will be my final comment tonight. On Wednesday this week, a resolution will be debated in the General Assembly of the United Nations on the question of sanctions against Cuba. Now, they've had 25 previous resolutions in the United Nations. All of them overwhelmingly, 190-something countries will vote against the blockade of Cuba. And 3 or 4 countries, led by the United States, would vote to keep the Cuban blockade in progress. Since 1917, when the Trading with the Enemy Act was passed by the United States Congress, and progressively thereafter, there have been laws passed by the United States Congress imposing not just military, which you'd understand, but economic blockade against Cuba. Up to now, Cuba has been suffering. In fact, the Cuban economists calculate that the sanctions imposed by the United States government since 1917 have caused the Cuban government and people over $126 billion. Now, thankfully, President Obama has done what he could. In fact, he went there in March this year, a historic visit, which I spoke about on this program. And he remarked that the sanctions against Cuba were not only obsolete, but they were harmful to the Cuban people and unjustified. But the president in the United States can only do so much by executive action. It all depends on the Congress. And my hope and dream is that the United States elections would produce a Senate majority for the Democratic Party. Well, naturally, I hope the election will result in Mrs. Clinton being president. I hope the Senate would have a Democratic majority. And I hope the Democrats will achieve success in the congressional elections. They may not overtake the Republican majority because the Republican has a very sizable majority. But I hope Mrs. Clinton, if and when she becomes the President of the United States, would further the releasing of the pressures, the unjustified pressures on Cuba. But the resolution will be debated this Wednesday, and I hope that once again Cuba will get the overwhelming support of the nations. I will speak to you very shortly on the economic blockade of Cuba in a program fairly soon. So, once again, happy independence to one and all. Let us join hands together and try and obey the creed that we are taught in our national anthem. May peace reign from shore to shore, and let us hope that God will bless our nation, to borrow a phrase from the Trinidad national anthem. So that is all from you. Do have a pleasant week and enjoy the Independence holiday. Let us think of the significance, and let us hope that God will bless us to grow as a nation. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday, DB, for another presentation in this public service nation building series, The Law and You, and I do hope you have enjoyed my random thoughts.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.